Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story about what if Naruto befriended Kurama early. After a life-changing event, Naruto meets Kurama early and they become partners and even good friends. With a better outlook on life, he meets many who want to join him and help achieve their dreams and goals together. Among those friends are many beautiful women. Realize just how important he is to them. Before we start, thank you for all of the support. It really means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. You can suggest a Naruto fanfiction with a link in the comments if you want me to read it, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. So let's start. Chapter 12. New Friendships and Cinnamon Buns. Warning. This story will contain mature language, sexual themes, and graphic depictions of violence and gore. Disclaimer. I do not own Naruto or any of its characters. Chapter 12. New Friendships and Cinnamon Buns. Flashback to yesterday afternoon in Hokage's office. You're a real demon, Unko Senin. Naruto grumbled as he gingerly applied a bag of ice to his groin. He was laying on the couch in the corner of the office, facing up. The object of his current ire, Jiraiya, was sitting next to him in a chair. The Toad Sage chuckled at Naruto's temporary nickname for him. It was just a light tap. I'm not stupid enough to jeopardize the future of two lost clans. The rest of the time was just me spanking your cute little butt to humiliate you. Just be happy I didn't do it in front of those two purple-haired beauties. A light tap. Any more and it would have been chakra-powered. Naruto shouted with a comically angry expression. Just remember, I regularly get chakra-powered kicks and stomps to my balls every time I'm caught doing my research. Jiraiya finished with a perverted leer on the last word. You'll get no sympathy from me. None at all, you old pervert. The blonde quickly retorted with a deadpan expression. Jiraiya's right eye twitched at getting no respect from his student as usual. Anyway, I figure you've learned enough not to be so reckless about this. You're lucky that snake bastard was too arrogant to think his curse seal was breakable. Otherwise, he would have incorporated a self-destruction seal into the main array to instantly kill Anko-san the moment it sensed the array dissolving. I'll let this slide due to the fact you're still inexperienced and it was in the heat of the moment. Just please think more about studying any seal that could affect a human life more closely next time. He lectured with a serious expression. Naruto became sober at the fact that he did actually risk Anko's life with this. He shivered at the thought of her dying in his arms instead of sleeping contentedly, and exhaled a shuddering sigh to expel it from his mind. It was no use dwelling on what didn't happen, but decided he would at least be more careful next time. I understand, Jiraiya-sensei. He murmured quietly as he stared up at the ceiling with a downcast expression. Jiraiya nodded, satisfied that the boy truly understood due to being addressed respectfully just now. Now, we need to keep this quiet from that snake traitor. There's nothing he hates more than failures, especially when it's one of his own masterpieces. He'd do anything to eliminate any outside variable, and that includes killing you. Be careful if you ever have to deal with him in the future. He advised, his gaze steady on Naruto's. His godson nodded firmly before he groaned and adjusted the ice bag on his groin. Anyway, where'd Hokage Gigi go? He asked now that he noticed the absence of the third Hokage in the office. Sensei said he remembered something and went somewhere. Or to wait for him. On that cue, the office door swung open to admit the third Hokage carrying a giant dust-covered scroll into the office. I must be going senile with old age. I can't believe I didn't think of this for 2 weeks until now. He grumbled as he put the scroll down on the floor in the center of the office. Jiraiya's eyes bulged out when he had a close look at the scroll's kanji. Naruto sat up on the couch, watching this scene with curiosity. Sarutobi-sensei. Ist that. Jiraiya pointed lamely at the scroll. His sensei nodded with a smirk as he applied his blood to the seal on it. In the next instant, the scroll unfurled itself to show 10 storage arrays for weapons. Naruto stood and limped over to stand by his godfather. Aro Senin, what's this? You look like you're about to squeal like a fangirl over this. He pointed out Jiraiya's childishly excited expression while the third prepared to unseal the stored items. You fool. This is an honor that only few had. Sensei along with the elders are probably the only ones currently alive who have seen these weapons. I never thought they'd come out of storage in my lifetime. Jiraiya admonished his student. While this was going on, the third slapped his hand on the main seal array connected to all 10 weapon arrays. A large amount of smoke exploded from the scroll with a pop and nearly filled up the office for a moment. He and Jiraiya heard Naruto yelp in discomfort and looked over at the boy when the smoke cleared to see him squinting in pain with his arms up in front of his face as if to defend himself from an invisible force. I can really feel the fox's chakra. Whatever they are, they're practically radiating it. He winced as he forced himself to get used to the overpowering presence in the air. That makes sense. Naruto-kun, what you're looking at are the 10 weapons that were recovered from Hashirama-sensei's famous battle with Uchiha Madara. The first Hokage used them against him and the Kyuubi. The third explained. At this point Naruto recovered enough to take a closer look at the weapons. He noted 9 different swords of varying designs and sizes. One that stood out to him was twice his size with a sinister-looking curved edge. Another standout was a small tanto with a very complex seal array on the hilt that he didn't think he could ever hope to decipher. The 10th weapon was a giant shuriken that he wasn't sure he could lift and throw with any amount of skill. All in all, they were extremely high quality and durable looking. He also noted, with amusement, Jiraiya crouching over one of the weapons with a glazed look in his eyes and drool almost coming out of his mouth. Now that I'm used to the radiation, I can tell they're carrying a lot of the fox's chakra. It's also very potent, like it hadn't degraded at all since the battle. Thanks to the stasis effect while in storage, I guess. Naruto observed. The Hokage nodded with a smile. It's obvious why I brought them out. I'm thinking you might be able to absorb the chakra. I'll interject here that I am not happy seeing those weapons. They hurt like hell when that wood asshole stuck them into me. We fought with those damn things in me for days. Kurama grumbled. I can understand that. We'll make it quick then. I just hope I won't scream like a pussy this time when I absorb the chakra. It feels really potent. No promise I won't tease you afterward. She retorted with a snicker. Ignoring the jab, Naruto brought his right arm up out in front of him and channeled some of Kurama's chakra into it. The shroud now covering it, he concentrated for a second before he could see bits of dark chakra appearing in the air from the direction of the weapons as they whirled around to form a dark and dense chakra ball. Hiruzen and Jiraiya, now done gushing over the weapons, observed the procedure closely. So you did figure out how to begin forming the Rasengan like Sensei said, Gaki. Jiraiya spoke with a thoughtful expression. Yeah. The fox told me when she saw you using it, she was reminded of how her Bijudama was formed. They were similar in principle. From there, we figured out the 3 steps you mentioned. Rotation, power, and then compression, right? The sage nodded, genuinely impressed. I'm still stuck on the first step, though. We haven't figured out how to tell if I did each step right. Naruto explained as he grimaced with effort to contain the still growing ball of dark chakra. At this point, it was the size of a normal-sized kickball. Since you've learned that much, I'll make it easy for you when I teach you how to do each step correctly this summer. Jiraiya explained as he watched the dark chakra ball eventually stop growing. It was now the size of a large beach ball. The blonde nodded in understanding, then grunted in exertion as he had to support his right hand with his left hand as he expanded the chakra shroud to wrap around the ball. Naruto-kun, are you sure that much won't kill you? The Hokage asked in a worried tone as he realized the size and potency of the chakra ball hovering above Naruto's hand. The fox said I won't die no matter how much pain I go through as my body adapts more to accept more of the yin-infused chakra. I'm okay with that since I want to be the strongest shinobi around and protect my precious people. If a little bit of pain is all I need to move closer to that goal, I'll gladly take it. Naruto answered with a determined tone as the chakra shroud broke the ball into pieces to be absorbed back into his body. The boy turned to Jiraiya. I'll probably be out like a light for the rest of the day after the pain passes, so just drop me off at my apartment whenever you can. Jiraiya nodded grimly as he noticed the boy's body begin to twitch with twinges of pain all over. Before long, the hardened toad sage had to grit his teeth as he watched his godson collapse to the floor, trembling and straining to keep from yelling out in pain, his heart going out to this young boy who was prepared to do what it took to get stronger. It was a long and tortuous 30 minutes for the older men in the office until they sighed in relief upon seeing Naruto's body become still as he slipped into unconsciousness. He did not once scream in pain, a testament to this boy's incredible willpower. Sensei, you should know I'm going to take him to the site of the QB's ceiling when we leave tomorrow. Also, if he's up to it, we'll be stopping by the Valley of the End on the way back from training. Jiraiya advised as he scooped up the unconscious blonde into his arms. The Hokage nodded in understanding. As long as Naruto-kun feels he is ready to visit the place where his parents died in their final stand against the Kyuubi. We'll be in my usual hotel suite if you need us before we leave. Not going to take him to his apartment. After all the crap and pain he went through, I figured he deserves a good night's sleep in a comfortable bed, instead of that lumpy pile he calls his mattress, before we get started on his training for the summer. The Toad Sage explained with a smile as he left the office with a sleeping Naruto in his arms. On the road out of Konoha present time after spending the night sleeping peacefully in the most comfortable bed he laid on in his short life, Naruto woke up to the news that Jiraiya would be taking him to the site of his parents' death. That darkened his mood some to say the least, as evidenced by his quiet demeanor while walking a step behind Jiraiya and Anko on the dirt road. The two escorts glanced at each other awkwardly, wondering what to say to the downcast boy. After a while, it was Anko who slowed down enough to walk next him and broke the uncomfortable silence. Gaki, while I hate to bring this up, I'm wondering why we're going to where your parents died if it bothers you this much. She began with concern clear in her voice. Naruto glanced up at her with a weak smile. She frowned inwardly as she decided she didn't like this side of the blonde and vowed to keep him upbeat as much as she could in the future. Sorry if I'm worrying you. I'll be okay. However, before I tell you more about myself, I'm curious as to why you're here with us. You never said anything about coming along yesterday, and now you're suddenly with us this morning. Naruto inquired of her, who shifted awkwardly about being put on the spot about her reasons. To be honest, I wasn't planning on coming along at all. For one thing, I didn't even know you were leaving until last night. Yugaone mentioned your annual summer training trip and that usually a volunteer or two comes along to help train you. That answered a lot of questions on why you're strong for your age if you've been trained by the likes of Guy and Kakashi in the past, along with Jiraiya-sama here. The purple-haired woman explained as she rubbed her neck nervously. Naruto blushed at the praise before inclining his head for further explanation. I was thinking after talking with Yugaone yesterday that I'd like to know more about you if we're going to be friends from now on, and I just went back to the old man last night and requested time off for my trip with you too. I know you have a few secrets about yourself that was forbidden by laws because I was a chunin up until yesterday, and I thought it's best if you tell me any of them yourself rather than learn it secondhand from people who might not like you. Naruto glanced up at her with interest as soon as she mentioned his secrets. She smiled warmly at him as she continued. Don't think I haven't noticed some of the glares on you from those idiot villagers at that dango shop last year. It felt really weird having the glares split between us two. You're a big mystery and I'd like to fill in some blanks about you over the summer and learn more about what makes you tick, if you don't mind. Anko explained as she put both arms up behind her head as she walked, pushing her large breasts out as they strained against her tight flesh-colored t-shirt. Naruto had to look straight ahead with his eyes threatening to betray his good intentions as they kept stealing glances at her incredible curves. Jiraiya didn't have the same intention as he displayed a perverted smirk with a small nosebleed. He also brought out a notebook as he seemed to have an idea and began scribbling notes in it, before stopping for a moment when a question came to his mind. I'm surprised Ibiki-san let you go for 3 months if you were just getting started in his department. He inquired. He knew Ibiki was usually hard-headed about giving out long breaks like that, especially if it was last minute. He and Naruto then shivered as they noted a sweet smile form on Anko's face, but they knew there were evil intentions behind it. Let's just say I have some knowledge on him and leave it at that. Back in Konoha, a shiver went down Morino Ibiki's spine as he was laying his head on the top of his desk in his office. He ignored it as he wondered how the hell Anko figured out his darkest secret after just a few months of working in his department. And she was merciless in blackmailing me into giving her that much time off. I'd be so proud of her if this wasn't being done to me. Hoping to soothe his nerves, the big, scary-looking, and hardened man reached into his triple-locked desk drawer to pull out his greatest guilty pleasure. The latest volume of his favorite sappy romance manga. Back with the gang, the three walked in silence as Naruto contemplated Anko's reasons for going with them. Well, I guess that's a good reason for me to tell you more about myself. What do you know about the Kyuubi no Kitsune? He quizzed of his newest friend. Enough to know the fourth Hokage didn't kill it like the history books said. She replied quickly in a bored tone, making Naruto and Jiraiya jerk their heads toward her in surprise. Anko glared at them annoyed. I'm smarter than I look. I know a mere human, even one as powerful as the fourth, couldn't kill a force of nature like the Kyuubi. I was 6 when the attack happened and its power was so awesome that not even the most powerful jutsu I could think of would put a dent in that demon fox. I like this one. She at least respects my status as the strongest entity in the world. Kurama stated pridefully. Of course you'd like whoever praises you. I wonder what she'd think when I tell her a bit more about your cute moments. Like how you like to pounce and play around in the tall grass I made for you, or that you sleep with your tails wrapped around you in a cute and protective way. That never leaves your mouth if you know what's good for you, Naruto. She growled. Naruto smirked inwardly, satisfied with his teasing of the fox. Do I sleep like that? The fox asked shyly after a moment. If I didn't know you as a sadistic sensei from hell, I'd think you were adorable. He had to hold in his chuckle as he heard the fox scoff. You're a lot smarter than 98% of the village, at least. So what do you think happened to the Kyuubi instead? Naruto quizzed further, not noticing Anko's slight blush as he praised her intelligence. Jiraiya did, and he scribbled some more in his notebook, smirking. It was sealed into something. At least that's what my former sensei said. Though he didn't say what or who. Anko's face flashed with anger as soon as she mentioned her former sensei. The men knew who she was talking about but left it aside for now. All of that's true. Though there's no what, just who. Guess when I was born and how old I am right now. Naruto just smiled as Anko whirled her head toward him in surprise. Her face then changed expressions to one of understanding. After staring at his neutral expression for a long moment, she glanced up at Jiraiya, who grimly nodded his head for confirmation. She then looked straight ahead and walked in silence. The males looked at each other again and shrugged. They walked in absolute silence for the next minute. Finally, Anko took several quick steps ahead of the two men and turned around so she stood in front of Naruto, stopping him in his track suddenly. He looked up quizzically at her blank expression. Thank you, was all she said before she turned around and continued her walking. Jiraiya glanced down at Naruto, confused only to see a smile slowly spreading across the blonde's face. What was she thanking you for, Gaki? The toad sage inquired as the two males picked up their pace after their female companion. Not sure. Could be anything from supposedly keeping the village safe by containing the monster, to trusting her with this information. Why the smile then? It's not often I'm thanked for anything I do. I'll take it. After some time walking, they came up to the treeline into the forest where the sealing site was located. From that point onward, they needed to travel via the tree limbs. They decided to sit down for a quick snack break before continuing. Oi, Gaki. Anko called out as she bit into an apple in her hand. Said Gaki turned his head in her direction as he chewed on his own fruit. I forgot for a minute, but you haven't answered why we're going to where your parents died. You just said it was where they passed away, but there's another reason, isn't there? Naruto and Jiraiya exchanged looks. The toad sage shrugged before speaking up. I'll field that question. Gaki here wouldn't be able to explain how to boil water, let alone this. Naruto shot his godfather a dirty look before grumbling as he bit into his apple. Anko smirked at her companion's antics. Before we begin, Anko-san, this is top secret. Aside from Sarutobi-sensei, not many Junin and Anbu know about this. The fact that the Hokage allowed you to come along means he believes you're trustworthy enough to learn anything on the trip. Anyway, we're training Gaki here on how to effectively use the Kyuubi's power. We've been doing this every summer since he started academy. Ah, so that's why we have to go far out of the village for this. Just in case something went wrong, right? Anko concluded with a raised eyebrow. Correct. However, this year we just made a discovery that the Kyuubi's chakra left over from before she was sealed into Naruto still existed, thanks in large part to you. It has a certain component that would improve Naruto's control of the chakra the more he absorbed it. So we're going to where the Kyuubi was sealed so he can find and absorb any residual chakra left by her that night. Wait. You're saying the fox is a she? Enko exclaimed in shock. Yeah, I found it hard to believe at first too. Her deep voice certainly threw me off for a while. Naruto interjected with a foxy grin. One would sound loud and deep enough at my size. Kurama defended lamely. So you're in touch with her even now? Enko quizzed. Yeah, she teaches me a lot, so we're sort of student and sensei. Thanks to her incredibly sadistic teaching methods, I became like this. You'd better appreciate that, fool. Without my allegedly sadistic methods you wouldn't be able to do even a fraction of what you can do right now. You'd be struggling with that pathetic Bunshin no Jutsu and have learned nothing else. I know that, but I still reserve the right to complain a little. For example, I could do without the ravine climbing. I still have phantom pain with my old broken bones from that. That's because you're such a delicate little flower. Kurama retorted with a chuckle. And that's precisely why I have trouble thinking you're female. You talk more like a male. He shot back with a twitching eyebrow. So the most powerful entity in the world is female. If I wouldn't feel stupid for screaming, "Girls rule," at the top of my lungs, I probably would have done it. Enko spoke up with clear pride in her voice. I'm liking her more. Of course you would. Enko's cheerful expression suddenly changed to one of puzzlement as she dwelled on something Jiraiya said. Jiraiya-sama, what did you mean by thanks to me? The sage pointed at Naruto. The reason Gaki here saved your cute little ass just in time 2 weeks ago was because of the Kyuubi's old chakra that snake bastard put in you using that curse mark. Enko's eyes widened in shock as she instinctively brought her hand up to where her mark was. She glanced over at Naruto, who had on a serious expression. It's true. When that incident made your curse mark act up, I felt a familiar presence in the air. At that point, the fox urged me to go to where you were because she sensed her old chakra within you. It was what we needed to improve my control of her chakra, so we came to see if we could get it. It was by coincidence that I came upon you about to be hurt, so I jumped in. After that, I figured out that you had the chakra inside you and it was hurting you badly, so I made the decision to remove it from your body. With the exception of me, no regular human can stand up to prolonged exposure to the fox's chakra. She stared at him with wide eyes for a long moment. So it wasn't by chance. You intentionally came to me because I happened to have that chakra in me. I was miles away when I felt the chakra. If it was anything else inside you, he trailed off to let that hang in the air. Enko shuddered slightly as she came to terms with how truly lucky she was that bastard snake decided to try putting the Kyuubi's chakra in her curse mark instead of anything else. The one time she let the curse mark flare up since the first few months after she was brought back to Konoha, it saved her last sliver of innocence. How did you get it out of me? Naruto and Jiraiya glanced at each other before shrugging. I bit you. The blonde simply said. What? That's it. She retorted with skepticism. He decided it was better to just show rather than explain, and brought out a small bit of the fox's chakra. It was enough to make Enko look at him warily as she felt the familiar presence of the demon fox growing in the air. After a moment, Naruto bared his teeth to show elongated fangs along with his other more feral features. Enko had to fight down a blush as she saw how much more ruggedly handsome he became with the blackened lips, thicker whisker marks, wilder hair, slitted but gentle crimson eyes, and claws. She always did have a thing for a man looking animalistic. Demonic chakra is attracted to a strong demonic presence. So all I had to do was to bite down on the curse mark and absorb the chakra. After that, whatever was left of the seal disappeared. Naruto explained in a slightly deeper voice before he let the fox's chakra disappear and return to normal. The woman finally nodded in understanding after a long moment of staring at the Jinchuriki. Jiraiya had to keep his smirk from showing. Cover up the whole truth with a bit of it, huh? You still explained some of the procedure while hiding the fact that it was because the curse mark was corrupted and broken that you were able to absorb that chakra instead of the other way. Enko suddenly smirked sensually. So that's why I was topless that night. I guess you needed to take my clothes off, piece by piece. she teased with half-lidded eyes while slowly breathing out the last few words seductively. Naruto's face lit up bright red while poor Jiraiya rocketed backward from a massive nosebleed. Wait. You weren't topless. You still had that purple-laced bra on. So you did see, she exclaimed as she caught him in her trap. Jiraiya rocketed backward again from another nosebleed just when he was getting up off the ground. Are you sure you and Yugao-san aren't really sisters by blood? Naruto muttered with an annoyed tone at being tricked so easily again. Enko giggled cutely. Sometimes I wonder that myself. Anyway, I suppose I'll let you off for seeing me like that. Maybe make it part of your reward for freeing me from that mark. She said thoughtfully as she fought down a blush for being seen in her sexiest bra by her savior. No. The blonde immediately rebutted. Excuse me. I don't want that as a reward. It's not that you weren't attractive. I mean, what I saw was amazing, but if you felt bothered about what I did, you're welcome to put me in my place. Naruto declared with a determined expression, though one could see a bead of sweat going down the side of his face. Enko had to keep an appreciative smile from showing at his innocent compliment of her beauty. You're surprisingly honorable for a 12-year-old. Alright, Gaki, I suppose I'll just nick you this time for your good attitude. You also get a 5-second head start. She said with a sickeningly sweet smile as she flicked her right wrist before catching a hidden kunai flying out of her trenchcoat's sleeve. Naruto just smiled nervously for a second, before he instantly got to his feet and leapt into the trees. Enko silently counted down from 5 before rushing into the forest after her prey. A few seconds later, there were sounds of yelling and metals clashing. Left alone, Jiraiya got up again, wobbling from losing so much blood. He wasn't dazed enough to be unable to scribble more in his notebook with a lecherous grin plastered across his face. An hour later at the ceiling's site, this is it. Or close. Jiraiya announced as he jumped down to the ground from the trees. Enko and Naruto immediately followed suit. The Toad Sage could see his godson's nervous expression. Gaki, we don't have to do this if you're not ready. There's no pressure. He tried to offer a way out. Enko glanced over at the blonde with concern, wondering what he would do. For a long moment, Naruto stared down at the ground in front of him before perking his head up, determination clear on his face. No. Let's keep going. If I don't do this now, I'm not sure if I'd come back later. He declared. Jiraiya and Enko nodded before they all began their brief walk. I'll put you at ease before we arrive, Gaki. After what happened, we cleaned up the scene. You're not going to see anything unnecessary. We properly buried the bodies and cleared the scene of any blood. Not just out of respect, but we also could not risk any other shinobi finding this site and take DNA samples for their own purposes. Jiraiya stated as he made his way through the thick forest, his two companions close on his heels. He glanced at his godson to see the boy nod in understanding and relief. After a few minutes, the trio came out of the thick forest into a large clearing. Enko and Naruto were surprised to see what looked like a giant light blue barrier dome dwarfing over the trio covering most of the clearing in front of them. Jiraiya stepped up to the edge of the barrier and put a hand up to touch it. I put this barrier up after we cleared out the scene. We could feel the area inside was practically saturated with the presence of the fox, and Sarutobi-sensei ordered me to put up an impenetrable security barrier. It was to protect this area and put it in stasis so we could study the effects of the chakra if we were able to. Gaki, the chakra you're about to absorb is going to be nearly as potent as it was on that night. Enko-san, this might explain why some of the fox's chakra ended up in you, because the few expeditions we sent here included Orochimaru each time. However, we weren't aware that he somehow managed to collect the chakra, if he did anything these times. Jiraiya explained as he rubbed his hand across the surface of the barrier slowly. Naruto noticed Enko glancing over at him worriedly when the snake trader was mentioned. He made a mental note to settle her worries about that soon. Here we go, kiddies. Jiraiya announced as he blurred through hand seals before slamming a palm on the barrier. In the next instant, the shimmering blue wall disappeared, revealing a large barren clearing that had clear signs of the Kyuubi having been here. After a long moment of standing at the edge, Naruto pushed himself to step inside the barrier's boundary with Jiraiya next to him. Enko felt it wasn't her place yet, so she decided to remain silent and walked a few steps behind the two males. Naruto saw giant gouges and depressions all over the ground as if a giant creature had been here. There were a couple of giant handprints and they were twice Kurama's current size, proving the theory that his father split the demon fox in two during the sealing. He also noticed a large pile of rubble at the edge of the clearing. Jiraiya, seeing the blonde's interest in the rubble, decided to clarify. That used to be a private cottage for whenever your parents wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of Konoha for a while. From what Sarutobi-sensei told me, Minato teleported the fox over here when she was about to damage the village with one of her Bijudama. He was able to do that because of a Hiraishin marker he kept here. The sealing happened immediately afterward. Naruto nodded, thankful for the explanation. He wanted to learn more about what exactly happened that night. Something small next to a large grouping of ground damages caught his eyes and he walked slowly over to it. When he arrived, his eyes widened upon recognizing the object. Jiraiya and Anko both shifted in discomfort at seeing the object Naruto was walking to. This was my ceremonial cradle, wasn't it? The boy murmured quietly as he stood over a small stone cradle barely big enough to hold a newborn. He didn't need to see Jiraiya nod for confirmation. His eyes quickly scanned the ground around the cradle for any sign that his parents might have been nearby in their deaths. Even for any trace of blood. He felt relieved when he saw two pairs of distinctive footprints near the cradle, and his heart sank a little when he saw they were down on their knees. At least they were near me when they died. I wonder what they had to say. He quietly said to no one in particular as Jiraiya and Anko silently put a comforting hand each on his shoulders. I witnessed their final moments just before I was sealed into you. They had a lot to say to you. Kurama, silent for the past hour, finally spoke up with clear hesitation in her voice as she dreaded the response from Naruto that came. Can you show it to me? I need to see it. Her host inquired with determination. He could tell Kurama did not want to share her memory of that event for his sake, but he needed to see this. Naruto, you should know that I was released from that masked bastard's control in the last few minutes and I was desperately trying to keep my brief freedom. I was fully aware and in control of my actions at that point. I was also very angry when your parents managed to ensnare me and were preparing to seal me into you. I tried to kill you to prevent that and they got in the way of my strike. Even though they were already dying and I merely quickened the process, it's not a scene a child should see of his parents. Kurama admitted nervously as she felt her container stiffen when she mentioned his parents taking her attack meant for him. Naruto took a deep breath to steady himself before continuing. I'll see you in a second. He stated firmly as he heard Kurama sigh dejectedly. He turned to his companions. Thanks for your support. However, can you give me a few minutes to mediate? The fox said she has memories of that night and I'm going to ask her to show me. I want to hear what my parents had to say. He requested solemnly of his companions. Jiraiya flinched as Anko looked on worriedly. Gaki. Are you sure? I've seen the results. They did not die peacefully at all. I know. The fox said as much, but I'm prepared. I just want to be left alone for a few minutes. Naruto declared as he turned around, not leaving any room for debate as he sat down on the ground in his lotus pose a few meters away. Jiraiya and Anko watched with trepidation. In the mindscape Naruto appeared standing in the middle of the plain portion of his mindscape in front of Kurama. He grimly looked up at the giant fox's sad expression. No words were needed as she brought up a holographic projection of her memories out of thin air. Naruto, I'm sorry for what I'm about to show you. She simply said, her voice filled with sorrow. A few minutes later outside in the clearing Jiraiya and Anko stood a few meters away from the mediating Naruto as they watched silently, nervously awaiting any sign of activity from the boy. Anko decided to bring up something that was nagging at her inside. His father's the fourth Hokage. Am I right? She asked for confirmation. She was surprised to see Jiraiya nod with no hint of shock from him at that information being found out. You look like you were expecting me to find this out, even though I'm sure it was a big secret if the rest of the village had no idea. I'd be disappointed in your intelligence if you didn't figure that out by yourself with all the obvious clues around here. The fact Sarutobi-sensei let you come along on this trip is a sign that he trusts you to keep whatever information you find to yourself, so I see no reason to hide anything from you. Jiraiya retorted gruffly. Well, aside from the Gaki being basically a mini fourth, I'm pretty good with tracking and doing investigations. I could easily tell from looking around this area that it was just the fourth, since he obviously had to be here to do the sealing, and a woman, most likely the mother, with baby Gaki until the others arrived after the fact. Since you guys kept mentioning that his parents died here and I don't see any sign of another couple, it's impossible to dismiss the fourth as the Gaki's father. Enko recounted her observations from walking around the clearing. Jiraiya smiled. I would be a bit more impressed if you figured out the mother yourself. Uzumaki Kushina. She quickly replied with a victorious smile. The sage glanced over at the young woman with a raised eyebrow, hoping for further explanation. I ran into her a few times around the village when I was a child before the Kyuubi attack. She was a beautiful and kind woman. Someone like her was impossible to forget, especially with that long red hair. I saw her with the fourth one time and I remember thinking it was so obvious they had the hots for each other. Being around 5 at that time, I was hoping I didn't catch their cooties. Enko chuckled as she relived the memory of Kushina's bright and mischievous smile, very similar to Naruto's. Jiraiya nodded with a gentle smile, lost in his own memories of the couple that were like his own offsprings. Tell that to the Gaki when you can. He'll want to hear more about his parents from anyone that met them. Enko nodded as she went back to watching Naruto meditate in silence for a moment. Jiraiya glanced over at her and he could tell from her expression that she was starting to care for the blonde. He wondered if any romance would develop in the future, especially with the Hyuga heiress around him. In any case, he thought he should at least encourage this purple-haired woman to deepen her bond with his godson. Enko-san, you should talk to him about your own past soon. It's clear you're afraid of him finding it out eventually. He stated bluntly as Enko jerked her head to him with wide eyes before she sighed. It's that obvious, huh? I know I should let him know, especially since he shared his secrets with me, but I'm afraid of what he'd think. It would be pretty hypocritical of the Gaki if he thought badly of you for that. What do you mean by that? He's had to live with the village's hatred directed at him since the day he was born. Even now, most of the villagers still hate him for what he represented, even though he never made the choice to carry that stigma. Sound familiar? Enko winced at being reminded of her own situation. That's what I thought. I think he knows already and is just waiting for you to feel comfortable enough to share your story with him. I guarantee you it'll make you feel better to talk it over with someone who can understand where you're coming from. At least just think about it. The Toad Sage urged. Enko could only respond with a silent nod of understanding before they returned their gazes to Naruto's still form. After a few long minutes, they perked up upon hearing him let out a loud exhale. Any hope of seeing Naruto at least come out of his mindscape okay was shattered when they saw a look of deep pain and suffering creep up on his face. The boy was straining to not cry as he looked up to the clear sky and took heavy, long, and trembling breaths. He moved a hand to clench on tightly to his orange jacket's fabric right over his heart, as if to try to contain the pain flowing from there. Naruto. Enko called out softly, dropping her usual nickname for him for the moment. She tried to step closer to the suffering blonde before she was stopped in her track by him raising his other hand in a halting gesture. Naruto let out one last loud exhale before shakily getting up to his feet. Enko-san, Jiraiya-sensei, please step back. I'm going to absorb the sea chakra now. My emotions are kinda wild so I'm not sure what's going to happen when I bring out the shroud for this. He shakily said as he looked over at his two companions with dull blue eyes, pain evident in them. He then slowly turned and walked away toward the center of where Kurama had been restrained for her sealing. Shocked at the sudden action, Enko stood still for a moment before she felt her body move forward toward the suffering boy. Naruto. You don't have to do this. Just take it easy for now. Her voice rose in alarm as she felt the desperate need to try to comfort him. That was before she felt the powerful Toad Sage's hand gripping her shoulder, keeping her in place easily. She jerked her head back toward him with a deadly glare and snarled at him angrily, not caring she was trying to threaten one of the most powerful shinobi in the nations. Her actions didn't faze him one bit as he pulled the struggling woman backward. Let me go, asshole. Can't you see he's hurting? Enko yelled at the tall white-haired man as she tried to take several swipes at him, all of which he easily blocked. I know and there's nothing I want more than making sure he's okay but he's unstable right now. I can feel him barely holding the fox's chakra in for our safety. The best thing we can do for now is to just allow him to let it out for the next few minutes, then you can move in. He warned solemnly as he pulled her back to the edge of the clearing, at least 100 meters away from the lone blonde. How much damage could he cause with that chakra? Enko shouted disbelievingly. As if to answer her question, the duo were blown back a few feet when Naruto threw his head back to the sky to let out a loud and pain-filled roar as red chakra exploded out of him violently in all directions. As the chakra expanded, a huge crater formed underneath and it got deeper with him at the center the bigger it got. Jiraiya and Anko had to put their arms up to protect against flying debris and strong gusts before the crater and chakra finally stopped expanding at around 50 meters from the boy. The chakra then compressed itself quickly around the boy to form into his three-tailed chakra shroud. Naruto's feral features seemed subdued as he stared blankly at nothing in particular in front of him while he brought his right arm straight up above his head, the hand outstretched. Jiraiya and Anko could feel the atmosphere shift and vibrate around their skin as they watched in amazement a large and dark chakra ball slowly forming in midair directly above Naruto. Anko glanced over at Jiraiya for any clue on what to do now, and was unnerved to see him looking so pale. What's wrong? Hasn't he done this before? Yeah, but the last time I saw him do this that ball was the size of a beach ball. He absorbed that into himself and he suffered 30 minutes of agony that I can only imagine. Look at the size of that thing and it's still growing. Anko shifted her attention back to Naruto and gaped as she saw the ball was at least 5 times the size of what Jiraiya saw the night before and it was still slowly expanding. We have to stop him. Won't that kill him? She pleaded as she wanted to go out to the boy, still struggling with Jiraiya's vice-like grip on her shoulder. It's too late. There's no telling what'll happen if he just let it destabilize instead of absorbing it. The Kyuubi said it won't kill him no matter how much it hurts but. He trailed off, worry clear on his face. After a long excruciating moment of silently watching Naruto continue to form the ball, it seemed to have finally stopped expanding and the entire clearing fell deathly silent. Enko's heart clenched tightly as she saw tears flowing freely down Naruto's cheeks, a sharp contrast to the boy's aggressively feral features. The two watched in abject horror as Naruto expanded his chakra shroud to wrap around the ball and break it into pieces. He then began absorbing the shroud, now mostly dark red with the new chakra in it, into his own body. As soon as the last bit was absorbed, the terrible presence lifted, leaving the clearing quiet and still once again, the only difference from before being the new large crater that formed. Jiraiya's hand lifted off Anko's shoulder at that point and that was all the prompting she needed. She dashed at full speed down the crater toward Naruto, reaching him in seconds as his hands started to tremble. She half-tackled him into a tight hug as she felt his body start to rack with jolts of pain. She felt him slowly wrap his arms around her underneath her arms and grasped painfully at her shoulder blades but she didn't mind. They sank to their knees as Naruto's body gave out and she gently pulled his head into the nape of her neck so she could whisper next to his ear. It's okay, Naruto. I'm here. Just let it all out. No need to hold it in. She spoke soothingly, and could feel Naruto nod his head slightly as he started to sniffle and sob while trying to hold in groans of pain but failing. After a few minutes of this, Anko felt Jiraiya step up close to the two of them. She glanced up at him as he let out a weary sigh. Damn, I hate seeing him like that. He should be happy and cheerful, not this. I don't know how long this will go on so I'm just going to go ahead and set up camp for us for the night. I'll get you when I make something to eat. He stated, his sad eyes lingering on the crying blonde. Anko only nodded silently as she tightened her hold around Naruto's trembling form. Some time later, Naruto popped his eyes open to see the night sky dotted with stars everywhere above him. After quickly gaining his bearings, he let out a sigh as he didn't seem to be permanently hurt from that absorption process. That was totally reckless of him. Anko then came into his view upside down, a relieved expression on her face upon seeing him finally awake. A nearby campfire cast a warm glow over her. Anko-san, he croaked a little as his throat was dry. What are you doing up there? And why are you upside down? Anko giggled uncharacteristically at his silly questions. You've been sleeping on my lap, silly. Where else would I be? Naruto widened his eyes as he reflexively tried to sit up only to be kept in place by a hand to his forehead. He noticed he was lying on the ground with Anko sitting behind his head, cradling it in her lap. Don't move, Gaki. You're staying right here until I say otherwise. Plus, I like running my hands through your hair. Enko teased as she slowly raked her fingers through his beautiful and soft sun-kissed blonde hair. Naruto blushed but let out a contented sigh as he relaxed under her ministration. He certainly appreciated the feeling of her soft and warm thighs on the back of his head and neck as well. How long have I been out? He simply asked. 7 hours. You spent the first 2 hours crying like a baby, then you slept the rest. Enko teased as Naruto groaned. The fox gives me hell about that. I don't need that from you, too. He retorted with a smirk. Enko's expression changed to one of wariness. Are you okay with her? The fox, I mean. She saw Naruto's inquisitive expression so she continued. Jiraiya-sama told me what might have happened that night, about how your parents protected you from a fatal strike from the Kyuubi. She almost panicked as she watched the blonde's beautiful blue eyes dull slightly in remembrance before she calmed down when he smiled slightly. Yeah, they did take a fatal strike meant for me. I'd admit seeing them get skewered by a giant claw was gut-wrenching, but I'm glad I did when I got to hear their final words afterward. Because of that, I'm not going to hold it against the fox. It's probably best I stay out of the mindscape for a little while though. We'll just start over in a few days and go from there. Enko smiled, nodding her head. They said they loved you, didn't they? She softly said as she made another pass through the boy's hair with her fingers. His blue eyes widened. They said a lot more than that, but yeah, that's the gist of it. He replied with a bright smile. How did you know? I'm an orphan too. My parents died in the Third Great War when I was an infant. Enko replied in fond remembrance. Naruto's eyes briefly changed to sadness for a moment. I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing, Gaki? That's the greatest wish of many orphans, I suppose. Other people tell me that my parents did love me and they would have given me a happy childhood if they hadn't died. But like other orphans, I always wanted to hear, I love you, straight from their mouths. I kind of feel bad I got my answer while you didn't. Don't worry about it. I'm happy for you, Gaki. Besides, I didn't really have much time to dwell on that question when I was taken in as an apprentice to Orochimaru when I was 4. Enko winced at mentioning her former sensei's name only to see Naruto's expression remain neutral, waiting for her to continue. She felt some relief at that and gained some more courage. He was a tough sensei and never gave me any time to relax and think in my training with him. However, I thought he was a great man and even began to see him as a new father figure in my life. I even thought I would do anything for him. She let out a fond sigh before continuing in a slightly angry tone, her fingers instinctively tightening around Naruto's hair. That's why it hurt so much when he betrayed the village and me. I left the village with that snake trader when I was 9 thinking it was a training trip. I went to sleep in a camp on the side of the road one night and I woke up 3 years later strapped naked to a lab table with Yugao freeing me from the restraints. I have absolutely no memory of the 3 years I was gone and no way to recover the time lost. So imagine my shock when Yugao told me that bastard betrayed the village the night he took me with him, and that I was used as an experiment for the curse mark in the end and left for dead in that lab. She growled out the last few sentences as Naruto reached up to take her hand from his hair to let her grip his hand tightly for comfort. She took several calming breaths before continuing. So I came back to the village and was deemed a traitor just because of my ex-sensei. It took a lot of effort for the old man to get me back into the shinobi force and I'm forever grateful to him for that. Even then, I went through hell with my old genin team making every effort to make me look bad and undermine me at every turn. I was lucky I barely made Chunin with that. Even now as a Junin, I still deal with a lot of hatred from the idiot villagers like you do. I'm just happy I had Yugao and Kurenai-chan around to help me through the tough times up until now. Naruto nodded in understanding as he smiled up at Enko from her lap. You can add me to that list if you'd like. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I know you didn't deserve any of that because you're a good person. Enko was more happy than she expected to be upon hearing that this particular person accepted her with all the flaws she had. Though she was curious about one thing. How would you know I'm a good person? I certainly don't act like one often. Your older sister. She broke into my home and tried to slice me into pieces when she thought I did weird stuff to you the night I took the curse mark off. While it was a misunderstanding, she declared she would do what it took to protect you from any more harm, and I knew right away she loved you a lot. Naruto chuckled as he watched Anko's face turn bright red from embarrassment. She did what? She didn't tell me that part. That's going too far, even for her. She muttered angrily as she contemplated retaliation for her dear sister. Naruto shrugged. Don't worry. I taught her a lesson. Besides, it was nice seeing her doing so much for you because she thinks of you as a great person. Anko let her embarrassment fade away as she looked down at Naruto, her hand back to raking through his hair absent-mindedly. She stared down into his blue eyes long enough to make him shift slightly under the gaze. Finally, she broke the silence. You're a strange one, Naruto. You're 12 yet you act older and more mature than I am sometimes. Naruto just shrugged, and they exchanged small smiles. At that point, they decided nothing else was needed to be said, so they spent some time enjoying the stars above them. Some distance away in hiding, Jiraiya smiled as he struck some lines through the recent notes he scribbled in his notebook. He decided the scene he just saw belonged to only the two of them. Hey, even he had some standards. Later at the secret training ground, we're here, kiddies. Jiraiya announced as he put his travel bag on the ground next to the small wooden shack at the edge of a large training ground, with Anko and Naruto following suit a second later. So what are we going to teach the Gaki this summer? The lone female inquired as she stretched out her body from the long travel here. He's proficient enough with ninjutsu and taijutsu at this point. As for kenjutsu, there's not much we can do with that until he gets the weapons he needs, so we'll leave that up to training in his mindscape with the fox. I'm going to teach him how to do the Rasengan. Afterward, we'll figure out a few more of my personal jutsu for him to learn. What about stealth, evasion, assassination, interrogation, and tracking? Anko inquired as Naruto watched the conversation with an annoyed tick on his forehead. He was being talked about as if he wasn't there. Jiraiya nodded knowingly. I guess that's why Sensei let you come with us. You'd make the perfect sensei for that. Anko smirked evilly as she turned toward the blonde suddenly, making him flinch and put up a wary defensive pose. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. A certain fox spoke up suddenly. Naruto and Kurama already got past the incident recently and their relationship was back to normal. The blonde could only nod mentally as he had the same feeling too. Let's get started on dodging thrown weapons. I'm going to give you a 10-second head start starting now. What do you mean, Anko-san? That's Anko-sensei to you, Gaki. And it's been 7 seconds, she barked as she took out multiple kunai and shuriken in her hands from somewhere in her trench coat. Naruto knew better than to argue further and ran at top speed into cover in the trees as the crazy woman cackled evilly before she leapt into the forest after the poor boy. While Jiraiya listened to the shrill screams of a young teen in the forest, he briefly wondered if he did the right thing by bringing Anko along on this trip. A few days later, "Oi! Why the hell am I tied up?" Naruto shouted as he struggled to get out the rope binding him tightly. Anko crouched down in front of him with a sweet smile. In case you're captured, you need to learn how to escape by yourself using nothing but your wits. That's the basic rope tying technique most shinobi know, so we'll begin with that. In the meantime, you're not going to be able to cover up your ears as I teach you about the worst torture techniques we know of. With that information, you should be prepared for whatever your captors might try to get information out of you. She stated with a smirk, remembering getting the same lesson from Ibiki that made her feel green for days afterward. She was surprised to see the blonde just raise an eyebrow. You don't seem worried, Gaki. She observed blandly. I'm not. I probably have heard worse. He replied dully. Her eyebrow twitched at hearing his nonchalant tone. False bravado will get you nowhere, she growled as she proceeded to spend the next 15 minutes telling the captured blonde of the worst torture methods she knew of. That was why it left her stunned as she stared down at the still tied up boy, meeting her gaze with a bored expression, not showing any sign of disgust. How? I made some of the prisoners in my department give up everything they knew just from describing one of these methods to them. You forget who I have in me. She has seen everything humans could do in her thousands of years existing, and she was only too happy to pass on some of her favorite methods. Hearing these made me lose sleep for months, and she refuses to tell me the absolute worst method for worry of shattering my mind just from hearing the description. I'd say the methods she was talking about would place in the 30s on my list of the worst I've seen. Kurama interjected helpfully. Enko felt a cold shiver go down her spine as Naruto smirked evilly. Let's see how you like number 15 on her list. A few minutes later, Jiraiya heard dry heaving coming from where Enko was going to teach Naruto about torture. He wouldn't have paid that any mind if he hadn't heard that coming from a female. Curious, he walked over to them to find Enko on all fours breathing heavy and trembling violently with Naruto a few feet away beginning to get out of the rope binding him. What's wrong, kiddies? His godson shrugged off the rope and stood up smiling innocently at him. Enko-sensei here tried to scare me with torture stories. I returned the favor with some of what the fox told me. I'll never be able to get that out of my head. How could humans do that to each other? I'm not even sure I hate Orochimaru enough to try that on him. Enko murmured fearfully as she shivered involuntarily. Really? It couldn't be that bad, right? Jiraiya said with a raised eyebrow. Let it be known that was the last time he would ever utter that phrase as his godson proceeded to repeat the same thing he said to Enko a few minutes ago. A few minutes later, Naruto was now walking away from his two green and heaving companions with a pleased smirk. A few weeks later, letting out a loud yawn as he stepped out of the shack early in the morning, Naruto decided to take a dip in the nearby hot spring. He failed to notice one other empty sleeping cot. A few minutes later, he found himself frozen solid at the edge of the hot spring as his eyes locked onto the naked and curvaceous form of one Mitarashi Enko stepping out of the spring on the other side. Her back was to him as she sighed contentedly holding a towel to her front, covering up her shapely breasts in her most private spot. She hadn't noticed Naruto yet. From where he was standing, he clearly saw her well-toned legs, her beautiful and round rear end that had to be crafted by Kami, her perfectly proportioned hips, and her small and smooth back. However, what he focused on most was her gorgeous silky purple hair, now out of its usual fanned ponytail, cascading down past her shoulders like a waterfall. It had a radiant sheen to it in the growing morning sunlight, especially when she flipped it lightly to shake off some excess water. At this very moment, he felt some stirring in his lions. Puberty has come for our favorite blonde. Kurama laughed as she watched this amusing scene. As if she felt a presence, Enko suddenly snapped her head around and was surprised to see Naruto standing there frozen in shock. After blinking for a moment, she felt her righteous feminine rage growing and was about to visit unspeakable horrors on him, when something unexpected occurred. Beautiful hair, the red-cheeked boy muttered in a daze. Enko was shocked by that statement, and blushed bright red. That was what he noticed the most. Even though he clearly saw her other features, ones she thought were more attractive to other men. Composing herself, she let out a loud exhale, which snapped the blonde out of his daze. Regaining his senses, he gazed into her annoyed eyes with growing dread. You've got 10 seconds to burn this amazing view into your brain before I get dressed and try my best to kill you for the day. If you survive, the memory's your reward. She spoke with a bloodthirsty smirk. Naruto gulped but seemed about ready to consider staying, before Kurama made the decision for him. Oi, I have eidetic memory and I can show you this memory in much better detail anytime you want. You might as well use the 10 seconds to get farther away from this crazy female. She's serious about hunting you down like an animal. Or a fox in our case. He didn't need any further prodding as he immediately disappeared back into the bushes, leaving the naked woman alone. For some reason, Enko felt a little annoyed. That baka. The least he should have done is spend at least 2 more seconds taking in my sexy ass. I feel a little insulted. But, he likes my hair. She thought with a giggle as she counted down from 10 then slowly got dressed. She might as well make it a little more challenging for herself by taking her time. Despite the stupid orange outfit, that brat could really hide if given enough time. Another few weeks later, Naruto was panting heavily as he hid himself underneath a thick pile of leaves on the ground somewhere in the forest around the training ground. Damn those two. They had to forbid my use of the transparent escape jutsu. I was beginning to have an easy time hiding from Enko-sensei, and now they rack up the difficulty. Not my problem. Besides, it would be boring for me to watch you cruise through your training. I want to hear your screams of pain and see your terrified expressions. Kurama cackled evilly. You're such a great friend. He retorted sarcastically. Fine, I'll help you out a little. She's behind you. Boo. His insides went cold as he felt a slender hand slip around his neck before he was pulled up out of the leaves in a headlock with a kunai pointed at his face. He gulped. "Hello there, sexy." Enko whispered from behind into his ear in a breathy and seductive tone, making him blush despite the deadly kunai pointing a few inches from his face. "You've been caught, and so soon too. You relied too much on that jutsu, so we're going to keep this up until you're at an acceptable level," she whispered in a disappointed tone, before smirking sinisterly. "But I am going to give you an incentive," she mysteriously said before twitching her kunai, cutting into the boy's cheek, making him cry out more in surprise than pain. "What the F?" The word died in his throat as he felt something wet slide across the cut, lapping up the blood that flowed out. His body jolted with electricity as he felt Enko's tongue move across his whiskered cheek seductively. "I really like her. I might actually even love her a tiny bit." Not helping. That's delicious. Which means bad news for you, Gaki. I'm going to be much more motivated to catch you and cut you each time I find you so I can taste more of this blood. So you'd better be more motivated than I am if you're going to overcome this." Enko intoned seductively next to his ear before she let him go to disappear into the trees. "You have 10 minutes, before I go after your ass again. You'd better improve your time or a small cut will be the least of your worries." Her voice called out from high up in the trees. Naruto's body shivered at what just happened. "I have mixed feelings about this. I should be really disturbed by this, but for some reason there's this other feeling I can't comprehend. That's called puberty. Now hurry and hide if you want to survive with most of your chastity still intact." Some time later on one evening, bored, Naruto drawled out in his mind for the 10th time that night. Jiraiya and Enko were sleeping peacefully in their cots. "Shut up, you annoying asshole. I told you before we're done with the training in your mindscape for the night, and any more than that would be counterproductive. It's not my fault you're having a bout of insomnia this evening. I know. I just can't do anything loud without waking these two up. I'm not risking waking Enko-sensei up after last time. Who knew someone as sleepy as her could aim so well when she was going for my balls?" He looked around the shack with his enhanced night vision before his sight came upon a small pile of books sitting by Jiraiya's cot. The blonde then quietly got out of his bed and snuck over to look through them for anything to read. He frowned in annoyance after a few seconds. Figures all that damn pervert would have here is porn. Can you read that volume?" Kurama piped up with some shyness in her voice. If Naruto saw her right now, he would have seen her acting a little bashful with a blush that was somehow visible through her crimson fur. "While I'm a little weirded out by that sudden request, I have to point out that's a more recent volume. Wouldn't you be better off reading the early volumes if you were interested in this? I've already read them. That's the next one I want to read." Naruto blinked in confusion. "Wait, how could you have read these books if you were inside me all this time?" Kurama remained silent as she let it sink in for the poor blonde. "Oh my, Kami. I was born from a pervert. A big time one." Kurama admitted as Naruto took the time to process this information slowly, lest he would have screamed in terror otherwise. "Please tell me Dad was the perfect example of a normal man. Don't let both of my parents be perverts. That was just the public face he put on. He was just as big of a pervert as Kushina was behind closed doors." Kurama replied as she blushed at the memories of some of the kinkier stuff her previous container did. No. I'm going to kill Ero Sennin in his sleep before he corrupts me too." Naruto cried out inwardly before he was about to make good on his threat as he slowly took out a kunai. Despite his best efforts, it wasn't the old pervert that corrupted them. It was your mother who turned Minato to the dark side. Naruto almost dropped his kunai in despair before he put it back. After a long moment of thought, he reached down to pick up the book Kurama wanted. "I figured you would be so disturbed by the revelations you'd swear these books off for good. Not that I'm complaining." Naruto sighed inwardly as he quietly made his way back to his cot and laid down to crack open the orange book. Can't beat him. Might as well join him. I'm going to see what's so great about these books. Early next morning Jiraiya yawned as he sat up in his cot and looked around. His eyes bulged out as he found Naruto lying in his cot reading one of his infamous orange books. He was about to ask what was going on before he was stopped by his godson snapping the book closed. The older man could see the young teen had some red tinge on his cheeks. Despite the oddness of a 12-year-old reading one of his books, he was curious. "So how do you like it?" he whispered for fear of waking Anko. He still wondered how someone that sleepy could have perfect aim toward any man's crotch. Naruto glanced over at his godfather with brief surprise, before he shrugged. "I was reading it for the fox. Apparently she likes your works." Jiraiya had to take a moment to let it sink in that the most powerful entity in the world enjoyed his works. Then he shook that absurdness off. "I see. And your opinion?" He smirked as he saw the red tinge return to the boy's cheeks. The storyline was interesting. The smut scenes. Not so much. They were boring to me. Naruto figured his godfather would have taken offense to that, but he was surprised to see him nod in understanding. That seems to be the common complaint most of the younger readers have about my series. Recently, the editor admitted I was using old-fashioned words that didn't appeal to them. Naruto just shrugged, not having too much sympathy for his godfather's situation. "How about this? You already have the mentality of a young 18-something and you're smart, so maybe you can help me with something." Jiraiya leaned in with a whisper. The blonde raised an eyebrow, wondering what the old pervert was thinking. A couple hours later, Mitarashi Anko was filled with dread. When she woke up this morning, she thought it was going to be a nice off day from training for her. She would just take a long stroll in the forest and enjoy the nature, then come back to play with Naruto some before eating and going back to sleep. However, she felt like she stepped into an alternate universe as she watched Naruto and Jiraiya sit across from each other at a patio table, shaded by a large umbrella, as they read through piles of papers and was bickering over which term needed to be replaced or not in Jiraiya's next porn novel. What topped it off for her was that they were wearing old-fashioned bifocal glasses and acting like they were squinting while reading through these papers. "Flower petal isn't something young people like me would care to empathize with, and we just think you're being a moron for dancing around and avoiding using more direct terms like pussy," Naruto argued. "How dare you, Gaki? It's much more romantic to a reader's soul to read these terms. It would be too raw and visceral otherwise if I wrote it more directly," Jiraiya retorted. "Look, Ero Sennin. You said you want to update your terminology to pull in younger readers. I'm trying to help you out with that." Whoa. Time out. A female voice interrupted the two males, who snapped to the source to find a seriously disturbed-looking Anko standing there. "Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to think I stepped into a different dimension for the moment and just assume my version of Jiraiya-sama and the Gaki are doing their normal stupid things while I'm stuck here in this pocket of alternate reality. In my world, a 12-year-old is certainly not arguing with a porn writer over terms to use in the next smut book." Anko calmly spoke with a dangerously twitching eyebrow. The two males glanced at each other nervously as the purple-haired woman pointed into the forest surrounding the training field. "I'm going to take a long walk out there and I'm going to come back in 5 hours. By then, everything will be back to normal for me. Otherwise I'm going to have to slit your throats for the good of mankind." Anko spoke the last sentence with a dangerous glint in her eyes. The two men began sweating comically as their female companion stalked off. They flinched when she stopped in her track and snapped back to them with a question. "What's with the glasses? Both of you can hit a bullseye 50 meters away without even trying." The two men glanced at each other briefly before shrugging. "For the atmosphere," they both stated at the same time as they adjusted their glasses haughtily. Anko took in an annoyed intake of breath and nodded slowly before walking again. "Reet. This is a really fucked up alternate reality," she concluded as she disappeared into the trees. The men glanced at each other once more before breaking down laughing. End of training trip. On the way back to Konoha. "Oi, boys. I've noticed something," Anko announced in an annoyed tone as she walked a few steps behind her male companions on the dirt road. They stiffened a little. "Why are we going to the Valley of the End? That's out of the way." Naruto tried to stall. "I'm not stupid, Gaki. I know that was where the Kyuubi fought with the first Hokage. You're thinking about checking the area for any residual chakra left over, aren't you?" Anko growled. She did not want to see Naruto put himself through the painful absorption process again. "Anko-sensei, you know why I'm doing this," the blonde stated firmly. "That you're going to put yourself through the meat grinder again. You have no idea how helpless I felt seeing you in extreme agony at the sealing site. How relieved I was when you finally fell asleep peacefully. And that was before I spent the whole summer getting to know you and we became good friends. What good is getting stronger to protect your precious ones if you're going to hurt the same people because they had to watch you push yourself past your limits? Enko raised her voice at her blonde friend, who glared back at her in annoyance. I made a promise that I'll be the strongest shinobi in the village to protect my loved ones. I would do anything aside from evil things to reach that goal. One of the lessons you gave me over the summer is that a shinobi makes use of any tool available to him. Well, I see the yin-infused chakra as something to help me get stronger. That way, I can add one more option to defeating my enemies. So what if I go through a little bit of pain to obtain it? It's the same as training yourself to exhaustion and then rebuilding the destroyed body for the next day. Enko growled in frustration upon seeing his stubbornness out in full force. She knew she wasn't going to make him change his mind about this. She whirled on her feet and made her way down a different path from the one the men were taking. Fine. I'm going on to the village. I'm not going to stick around and watch you cry like a pussy each time you do that stupid absorption thing. It's pathetic. She shouted over her shoulder. Oh, that's bullshit. You took great pleasure in cutting me up over the summer as training. You even have a fetish for my blood. You just want to get out of here so we wouldn't catch you getting off on seeing me in pain. Fuck you, pussy. Back at you, bloodsucker. Naruto breathed heavily as he watched Enko disappear down the dirt path. Ah, lover's spat. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Jiraiya said sagely after remaining silent throughout the entire exchange. Naruto glared over at him in annoyance as they began their walk again toward the Valley of the End. What part of this is a lover's spat? I agree with the old pervert on this. You're outvoted 2-1. I might be the Hokage in the future and it's a dictatorship. Overruled. Kurama scoffed at her cantainer's childish response. Alright, let's just go to the valley and get this shit over with. Naruto declared after taking a deep breath to clear his head of Enko for the moment. However, he couldn't help but wonder if he might have hurt his friendship with her. He could only hope the bond was stronger than that. 6 hours later on the same road in the opposite direction. I can't believe you forced yourself to do it 6 times. I know it was a huge area and you had to do it multiple times to get all the chakra there, but even I think you pushed yourself a bit too far with that, Gaki. Jiraiya spoke over his shoulder to an exhausted Naruto riding on his back. At least the chakra's potency went down over the years so it didn't hurt enough to knock me out each time. The blonde murmured back. Thank Kami for the small miracles. The godfather retorted sarcastically. Even with all the chakra we found, it wasn't enough to get me over the wall. I need more. Naruto grumbled. Jiraiya sighed and wondered if this new project to control more of the Kyuubi's chakra would end in failure. Over the summer, they discovered, to their dismay, that while it did change some of Naruto's body into characteristics similar to the demon fox inside him, it did not boost his attributes that much more than a chakra shroud of the same level would have. While it was easier to keep control of himself in his shroud, he was now barely managing to keep control in the four-tailed state. It wasn't as much progress as he would have liked. However, one bright spot in that setback was Naruto and Kurama could feel his body adapting more to the yin essence flowing through it. It felt like his body was simply waiting to absorb enough of that essence before it could evolve to the next step of controlling the demon fox's chakra better. I don't know where else to find more of the fox's chakra. We already had you absorb everything from all the places we know of. The only option is that Orochimaru might have more of the chakra in storage, but that's too risky for you at this moment. Jiraiya explained. I might have some information on where to find more. Huh. You know something. Naruto spoke out loud to let Jiraiya know that Kurama had something of interest to discuss. I wasn't sure if it was worth checking out, but now that we know my chakra could still be around for at least 100 years like at the Valley of the End, it's a viable option. You're saying there's still one more place? Naruto relayed for his godfather's sake. Yes, I'm positive the place will be saturated from top to bottom with my old chakra. I'm speaking of my den in which I've used for hundreds of years before that stinking Uchiha came and found me. Do you know where this den is? It's located in what's now called Land of Iron. It's deep in the mountains there and the locals never venture that far into the terrain due to the treacherous conditions, so I was never disturbed. Land of Iron, huh? Naruto repeated before he was jolted and nearly knocked off by Jiraiya straightening his back in surprise. Talk about incredible coincidences. He spoke softly in shock. What's the big idea? Naruto yelled as he tightened his grip on his godfather's back. Jiraiya was about to reply before he was stopped by something he saw farther up the road. He then smirked. Look who's still here. He spoke over his shoulder to Naruto. Confused, the blonde perked his head up to see who it was and was surprised to see the familiar purple hair. The men could see Anko crouching down on the side of the road, hugging her knees to herself as if she seemed to be waiting nervously for someone. Anko-sensei. Naruto called out excitedly before he remembered the spat they had, and sobered up quickly. Anko perked her head up at the voice and looked in the male's direction. Her face brightened up a little upon seeing Naruto before she frowned in worry when she noticed him riding on Jiraiya's back, as if he was hurt. She pushed herself up to her feet and waited for the men to make their way down the road to her. At that point, Jiraiya had to sweat drop as he felt like he was in the middle of a stare down between Naruto and Anko as they seemed to be challenging the other to say something first. Before the Toad Sage was about to crack under the pressure, Naruto broke the silence with a regretful sigh. Anko-sensei. I'm sorry for what I said back there. I should be more considerate of your feelings about what I'm doing to myself. Anko sighed as well before smiling slightly. Gaki, I'm sorry too. I should be more supportive of your goals, even if I don't agree with some of the stuff you're doing. They nodded to each other smiling before all three continued their journey back to Konoha with a silent agreement. A lover's reunion. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Jiraiya sagely said a few minutes later, chuckling as he felt killing intent from two sources. What part of this is a lover's reunion? Anko and Naruto shouted comically at the same time. Back in Konoha, Naruto stood in front of his apartment building with a frown. It wasn't because there was something wrong with the apartment building. It was precisely what wasn't wrong with it that made him frown. There was absolutely nothing about it to be wrong because the entire building had burned down to the foundations. Not even one piece of wood was left standing. The boy mechanically turned his head from the smoldering pile of ashes to the right to stare blankly up at the slightly sweating visage of the third Hokage. The old man was silently awaiting Naruto's reaction upon seeing his home of 8 years gone. 3 Anbu were standing behind him looking like they were trying to hold in their laughter. I'm finding this very suspicious, Hokage-sama. Naruto spoke neutrally as he studied the old man's comically sweating face. Don't be like that, Naruto-kun. The Anbu managed to save everything you hold dear from the building before it burned down, so there is no loss on your part. It's just too bad we cannot find the culprit responsible for this. Naruto swore he saw the Hokage taking everything he had to refrain from putting up air quotes around the word, culprit. He also heard one of the Anbu cough 3 times, which sounded suspiciously like, I did it. That's precisely why this is suspicious. He rebutted as he held out a scroll with all his belongings sealed into it. In his other hand was an incident report and an inventory list of everything that were saved. They got everything, including the ones of hidden so well that it would have taken several shinobi hours to find and disable the traps around them. Your Anbu must have balls made of diamond to do that in a building burning down around them. Unless, they took their time finding everything over the summer while I was gone and then the already empty building, accidentally, caught fired you too. He paused as he glanced down at the incident report. A stray Kaiden jutsu. He finished with a raised eyebrow at the sweating Hokage as the 3 Anbu behind him shifted uncomfortably. Whatever. He said dismissively with a casual shrug, causing everyone around him to face foe, the tension totally gone from the air. Don't do that to this old man's heart. Hiruzen shouted as he got up from the ground. Couldn't help myself, Hokage Gigi. I don't give a crap about this building. I'm just happy you guys took the time to save my stuff. Naruto retorted with a foxy grin. Ahem, due to this unfortunate incident, and the fact that one of my subordinates failed to save one precious item that belonged to you despite his valiant effort. The Hokage paused as the Anbu who coughed earlier stepped forward, feigning regret as he faked wiping a tear from his mask, and held out the other hand to show a burned ramen packet that expired years ago. Naruto raised an eyebrow amusedly at the theatrics. We have decided to compensate you by offering you a room in a newer apartment building close to the tower. It is also populated with tenants who I believe would treat you well despite your unique status. I honestly think you will be much happier there than here, Naruto-kun. The third finished with a bit of a flourish. Naruto had to smile warmly at the extent his surrogate grandfather would go to make his life more comfortable, but frowned as he thought of something. Are you sure, Hokage Gigi? Once the villagers find out, they'll try to vandalize that building too. He pointed out. What I meant by saying, people who'd treat you well, I meant those who are active within the shinobi force. I would like to meet a villager who would risk vandalizing a building full of active shinobi, because that person would have giant balls of steel. Either that or he's so stupid I would need to have the medics crack him open for research. The Hokage said bluntly. Naruto chuckled. Thank you, Hokage Gigi. It's going to be nice to have a hot shower after so long. That reminds me. Your rent will include the utilities, so it will not be possible for any utility company to cut you off this time, or they'd have to deal with a building full of angry shinobi. Alright. Show me the place. Naruto exclaimed as he walked off with the Hokage and the escorts toward the new apartment. Later at the new apartment. It's a bit smaller but I'll take it. Naruto declared as he flopped down on the couch provided with the apartment. This apartment was similar in design to his old place, only newer, and both living room and kitchen were somewhat smaller compared to the old place. Moving on up in the world, I suppose. Kurama said with a smirk. Naruto took a few minutes to enjoy taking in his new surroundings before he heard a knock at the front door. Grumbling and wondering who it was, he slowly got up from the couch to open the door. He was surprised to see Anko and Yugao standing there with housewarming gifts. Yo, Gaki. The news spread throughout this building that we have our favorite blonde as our newest neighbor. Anko said with a smirk as she pushed her way in. Yugao politely bowed before entering. Yeah, seems like my old apartment had an unfortunate accident with a Kaden jutsu. Naruto replied with some sarcasm as he offered for them to sit on the couch in the living room. The women chuckled. You should be happy. Yugao told me what kind of place it was from when she broke into it. Anko said the last few words pointedly as she glared at her older sister, who blushed at being found out. I'll get some tea for you ladies if you'd like. Naruto offered, and the women nodded. A few minutes later, he came back with cups for the women. Yugao took a sip and smiled happily at how good it tasted. Naruto was surprised to see Anko taking her cup of tea seriously as she took a careful sip as if to test it critically, before sipping it some more in a casual manner and smiled in appreciation. Seeing Naruto's raised eyebrow, Yugao decided to explain. Anko-chan is big on tea ceremonies, and that reaction means she likes your tea. You should see her in her formal kimono when she feels like doing a ceremony. She looks so adorable. She teased as Anko's face turned red. At least it's better than cleaning all of your swords all day. It's hell keeping the smell of that cleaning oil out of my clothes. She shot back. Naruto chuckled at the sisters' bickering. I look forward to seeing you perform a ceremony someday, Anko-sensei. I'm sure you'd look elegant. He complimented with a sincere smile. He was surprised to see Anko suddenly looking bashful. She nodded shyly before quietly sipping some more out of her cup as she avoided speaking more about this subject. It was apparent she didn't share her hobbies often. Gaki, just call me Anko-chan already. Next to Yugao and Nai-chan, you know me better than the rest of the village combined. I'm only your sensei when I'm teaching you something. She blurted out a moment later with a small blush on her cheeks as she averted her gaze, finding the floor interesting. Yugao had to hide a happy smile as she thought the summer trip with Naruto did her little sister some good. Naruto nodded with a warm smile. I'd be happy too. Anko-chan. A few months later during the fall, at Training Ground 42 just turned 13, Naruto was enjoying the crisp fall air as he stood outside in the middle of the leaves-covered training ground. He took in a deep breath through his nose, relishing the mixture of earthy scents his sensitive nose picked up. He raised an eyebrow, though, when he smelled a slight tinge of lavender mixed in. Glancing over to his left in slow motion, he saw a flash of indigo before he focused on the beautiful and smiling face of Hyuga Hinata. She seemed to be moving toward him in slow motion, her long and silky hair whipping around behind her agonizingly slow in the fall breeze. Naruto then noticed Hinata's open hand slowly going up in front of her in the classic Hyuga attacking pose. Confused, he checked Hinata's face again only to see it wasn't a smile she was displaying, it was a smirk as she had her Byakugan active. Oh right. I'm in the middle of a spar. On that cue, he saw his own closed left fist appear into his vision, tense and coiled as if ready to unleash against the poor girl. Rather, the poor girl who was about to painfully jab most of his tenketsu closed if he didn't do something. So unleash it, he did. With a sharp whoosh, his left arm was fully extended into a powerful jab in an instant, and it would have struck Hinata's delicate face if she hadn't slipped past by a hair's width thanks to her eyes. The only piece of her Naruto managed to get with that punch was her hair as it punched through the wall of dark blue. He noted at this point that her hair felt extremely silky sliding around his extended fist, at least before he was jolted by pain moving up through his arm. In a flash, the confidently smirking Hinata took advantage of his miss and managed to close several of his tenketsu in the arm in a flowing movement using her newly developed personal style of Juken. Taking that as his cue to retreat, Naruto leapt back to gain some distance from the dangerous Hyuga with his left arm hanging limply at his side. You got him, Hinata-chan. Victory is ours. A female voice exclaimed from the right. Naruto shifted his gaze between the smirking Hinata and the source of the voice, who turned out to be Ino as she celebrated what she thought was a sure victory. Troublesome. Ino, you know even without his left arm, Naruto is a dangerous foe. We need to be cautious. Shikamaru's voice spoke up from next to Ino. Naruto wasn't sure but he thought he forgot someone else. That someone else deemed this moment to be the right time to remind the blonde with a cry of, Buben Baika no Jutsu, partial expansion. Before a giant fist smashed into him from behind. The blonde let out a grunt of pain as he was sent flying forward, trying everything he did to recover in midair. He barely managed to right himself as he landed on the ground, forced into a pincer position between Hinata and the Ino and Shikamaru pair. What the hell hit me? He grunted as he struggled to stay on his feet. If he collapsed to the ground, it would be his loss according to the rules for this spar. He only had time to realize the person that hit him was Choji before he froze in place. He struggled to break free of whatever was holding him before he saw a long shadow leading from his feet up to a pineapple-haired boy. Kajimane no Jutsu, shadow possession, success. Shikamaru declared with a smirk. Yes. We finally got him. It took 4 against 1 but we got him. Ino hopped up and down in place next to Shikamaru, cheering. I apologize for the sneak attack, Naruto, but Shika put me in place to attack you when you weren't paying attention. Kind and gentle Choji bowed his head in apology as he walked up next to Ino and Shikamaru, though a small confident smile could be seen on his face. Hinata still remained on high alert as she watched for anything from Naruto even though he was trapped in the shadow jutsu. Her eyes were still blaring as she searched for any change in her blonde friend's chakra network and she remained in an aggressive kata. Hinata-chan, you don't have to worry. It's over. Ino called out to the Hyuga heiress. The indigo-haired teenage girl smiled knowingly. Until I hear Naruto-kun say, I surrender, we should not let our guards down. I'm going to disable the rest of his limbs. Continue to hold him in place please, Shikamaru-san. Troublesome. Grumbled the shadow user as he strained to keep the powerful blonde in place. All 4 fighters stiffened a little at hearing their captured prey chuckle lightly. You're right to be wary of me, Hinata-chan. Shika, out of the jutsu I managed to master by now, I can do one of them without seals even though it took a lot effort to be able to reach that point. Can you guess what it is? Shikamaru widened his eyes before he frantically glanced around the battleground for any clue to his opponent's next tactic. He's generating a large amount of wind chakra in his system. Hinata warned as she dashed in to try to disable their opponent. Your shadow jutsu can hold me in place, but it can't control my chakra when I don't need hand seals. Naruto stated with a smirk as his gaze shifted down for an instant. Shikamaru realized something and glanced down at the ground covered with dead leaves. The leaves. Everyone, run. Get away from the leaves. At that moment, just when Hinata was about to reach Naruto, the blonde expelled a large blast of chakra-generated wind from his body in all directions. The gust was strong enough to kick all the leaves high up into the air all around the 5 combatants. Hinata let out a yelp of surprise as some leaves hit her face, stopping her dead in her track. The other three fighters glanced around in surprise. I've got to hold Naruto in his place. I can't let the leaves distract us. Shikamaru thought as he tried to keep his jutsu in place. However, he received a shock to his system when he felt his control slip and the jutsu dissipated, as if Naruto simply vanished from his hold. He looked up to see the blonde now standing next to the surprised Hinata, who tried to strike at him but he deflected it with his right arm and pushed her to the ground with a hard shove to her abdomen, and Shikamaru's heart sank. Because of the spar's rule of a fall to the ground being considered a knockout, Naruto's strongest opponent, Hinata, was out. Straining to see through the still floating leaves, he tried to keep an eye on the blonde to see what he was going to do next, but he was stunned to see him vanish into thin air. He heard a feminine cry to the right before looking over to see Naruto easily judo flip Ino to the ground. He disappeared again and the shadow user heard a grunt to his left. Shikamaru shifted his gaze to see Naruto easily throwing the larger Choji over his shoulder to the ground with his one good arm. At this point, an annoyed smirk grew on the Nara's lips. That troublesome bastard, he's mastered kawarimi substitution to this level. To be able to substitute with something as small as a floating leaf without seals. The shadow user concluded this much before his troublesome friend appeared in front of him out of thin air, the blonde's usable right arm outstretched to prepare for a throw. These mischievous blue eyes and that insufferable foxy grin were visible even through the thick cloud of floating leaves. 5 minutes later, I hate you. Ino grumbled with her cheeks puffed in anger. Hinata joined in with her own puffed cheeks too. They were glaring pointedly away from a sweet-dropping Naruto. Troublesome. Shikamaru snorted from his lying position on the ground nearby. He still hadn't moved from when Naruto threw him to finish the spar. At least his friend was nice enough to have left him facing up so he didn't have to expend the energy to roll over. What a great friend he was. Choji was sitting next to him pleasantly eating out of his bag of chips. If he had any frustration from losing to Naruto, he was hiding it very well. He deserved to win because we let our guards down. Hinata was the only one who did right by being on guard from start to finish. We just didn't back her up quickly enough because of our complacency upon trapping Naruto. Shikamaru pointed out. Hinata dropped her puffed cheeks as she looked over at the pineapple-haired boy in surprise before blushing slightly. Anyo. It is because I am so used to sparring with Naruto-kun over the years. He never gives up each battle until he had no option. I hate this. I thought when we started learning our clan jutsu this year, we'd have a chance to win. Ino complained as she glared heatedly at Naruto, who put his hands up in a placating gesture. Inwardly, he was happy to see Ino had adopted a new attitude about wanting to win against him now. In the past, she usually gave up and accepted her losses to him because she felt she wasn't as talented as him. Lately she was picking up her training, and now busting through her old limitations. He couldn't wait for the day when she caught up. You almost did get me. Just don't give me too much time to think up a way out of any situation and it might be you who ends up winning. Naruto tried to appeal to his fellow blonde, before quickly moving on to the next subject. Anyway, I got some treats for you guys. My neighbor, Enko-chan, gave me some leftovers she got from her favorite dango shop. I can't stand too much sweets so I thought I'd see if any of you wanted to eat any before I give them away to some local kids. Naruto announced as he took out a scroll. Upon hearing the word, sweets, Ino's bad mood changed completely to one of excitement as she rushed to his side with sparkling eyes, eagerly awaiting her portion. Everyone's sweet dropped at the sudden change. Naruto noted offhandedly that Hinata seemed a little excited too as he unsealed the scroll to show a decent selection of sweets. Ino smiled brightly as she grabbed several chocolate chips cookies while Choji was happy to pick out a piece of angel food cake. Shikamaru ignored the treats as he opted to do some cloud watching instead. Naruto watched as Hinata picked something out of the pile and looked over it with curiosity. Naruto-kun, what is this? I don't believe I have tried this before. She inquired as she held her piece up for him to see. Oh, that's a cinnamon bun. I don't usually eat one of these but you might like it. Give it a try. Hiyashi's home. A cold shiver went down one Hyuga Hiyashi's back as he dropped some paperwork onto his desk out of shock. He took a deep steadying breath to make sense of that awful feeling. I feel a great disturbance in the clan's balance sheet. It is as if many thousands of Ryo cried out in terror only to be silenced by a new and insatiable addiction. I have not felt this since Hitomi-chan discovered red bean paste. And why do I feel the need to strangle Naruto-san? Back with Naruto and the gang, Naruto didn't know what to say as he watched in stunned silence. Choji was still like a stone, his mouth wide open as he was forking in a piece of his cake. Ino had a hand up to her mouth in shock and her pale skin was slowly turning bright red. Shikamaru raised himself half off the ground on his elbows, his eyes wide in shock as his face turned red too. Why were they all like this? It was because they were watching Hinata eating her first ever cinnamon bun passionately as if it was her lover. Naruto watched in morbid fascination as he saw his best friend of 5 years slowly lick all the icing off the bun lustily as she panted heavily. She let out an occasional blissful shudder as her wet tongue licked up some of the extra icing. All the while her eyes were glazed and half-lidded as if she was in pure ecstasy. With all the icing gone, she bit into the bun slowly and sensually, moaning softly with each painfully slow bite until she finally ate it all. She then desperately licked and sucked loudly on her fingers for any leftover icing before releasing each finger with a loud pop. Her 4 friends were still in shock at what they just saw of this shy and supposedly innocent girl. She slowly turned her head toward Naruto, her desperate expression making him flinch, before he was suddenly tackled to the ground with her straddling him. She was clenching on tightly to Naruto's jacket, panting and trembling as if she just had an orgasm. She lowered her flushed and desire-filled face to within inches of his, close enough that Naruto thought she was going to kiss him and, for some reason, he found himself happily welcoming it. However, it was not to be as he heard a faint and breathy whisper. More. Yes, Hinata-chan, he whispered as he strained to hear. I want more of the food of the gods. She murmured with shuddering breaths. Naruto allowed a moment of stupidity to happen when he tried to argue against an unstable Hinata. Ramen is. Don, argue with me. Take me to where I can find more of these buns of eternal bliss, she growled as she shook him, her Byakugan blaring full force. Why yes ma'am. Naruto nodded frantically before he forced himself up to his feet with the panting girl clutching on tightly to his arm as if she was weak in her knees from pleasure. He let out a sigh as he looked over his 3 shell-shocked friends. If I don't come back alive, tell my plants I love them very much. He saluted before he and Hinata disappeared in a whirl of orange and black leaves, his trademark shunshin, leaving 3 very stunned teens frozen in shock for hours until their brains wiped the memory from their minds and they wondered what they were still doing there. At the dango shop, the duo appeared out of thin air in front of the shop, surprising several outdoor patrons sitting outside enjoying the autumn air. Hinata seemed to have regained some of her composure in the high-speed travel over here, and Naruto was relieved when she only giggled excitedly at the prospect of getting more of the pastry goodness called cinnamon buns. At least she wasn't panting erotically and embarrassing herself in public. As the young teen girl practically skipped up to the counter, he was surprised to hear a familiar voice. Gaki. Don't see you around here often. Naruto turned around to see Anko sitting in a booth across from a young woman he hadn't met before. The new woman was unbelievably beautiful with long and curly raven hair framing her pale and unblemished face. He found her unique red eyes fascinating and her bright red lips were a stark contrast against her pale skin. She was dressed in what looked like bandages wrapped and intertwined together into the shape of a short kimono. The new woman was looking at him with appraising eyes that made him shift uncomfortably. Yeah, Hinata-chan here was about to jukin me to death if I don't take her to where she could get more cinnamon buns. Apparently she found her ramen, he explained with emphasis on the word ramen. Anko opened her mouth in a perfect O and nodded in understanding, before smirking. Didn't you mean she's found her dango? Really, Anko-chan? Are we going to fight over our own food of the gods again? Nope, we're not. As long as dango is the best in the end. Oi. Anyo, excuse me. May I ask who they are? Hinata asked shyly as she appeared next to Naruto with her arms full of wrapped cinnamon buns. His eyes bulged out at the amount of the pastry in this petite girl's clutches, but then remembered he regularly ate that much of his ramen. Hinata-chan, this is Mitarashi Anko, a friend of mine and a neighbor as well. She was also my sensei from this past summer. Anko-chan, this is my best friend, Hyuga Hinata. He did his introductions. Meanwhile, Hinata and Anko frowned slightly as they glanced at each other, as if they could tell they were going to step on each other's toes around Naruto. Meanwhile, said blonde bowed to the raven-haired beauty. My apologies, miss. I'm afraid we haven't met before. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Just call me Naruto like everyone else. The beautiful Kunoichi smiled gently at the boy's politeness before she spoke. My name is Yuhi Kurenai and I'm Anko-chan's best friend. She's spoken of you a lot, and I want to thank you for saving her from harm a few months ago. She replied with a grateful smile, while Anko blushed slightly at being mentioned talking about Naruto. The blonde put a hand up behind his neck sheepishly. Anko-chan mentioned you a lot over the summer too, and you're welcome, Yuhi-san. Anyone else would have done the same thing in my place though. Take on 3 Chunin and completely destroying them. I'm not so sure, Naruto-san. Also, please call me Kurenai. A friend of Anko-chan is a friend of mine too. If I may be so bold, what did she mean by saving Mitarashi-san? Hinata interjected with a look of confusion. Oh, it happened just before I left for training so I never got around to telling you. She was being bugged by 3 annoying men, so I put them in their place. Naruto said shortly, not wanting to sound like bragging. Put them in their place. Anko laughed before continuing. Half of one guy's body is still in cast, another has severe post-concussion symptoms and still can't throw or handle any weapon with his left hand, and the last one will never get rid of his limp. Hinata's eyes widened in surprise before looking worriedly over at Naruto. Wasn't that going too far, Naruto-kun? Not for what they were about to do to Anko-chan, Lady Hinata. Naruto-san left out that particular detail. Kurenai interjected with a slight scowl. Hinata took a sharp intake of breath before nodding in understanding. Seems like you've had the same situation with Gaki here, Lady Hinata. I recall an incident with Kumo a few years ago and this guy was the one who saved you. Anko pointed out with a grin. Hinata raised an eyebrow as not many people remembered who saved her after this much time had passed. She was intrigued by the fact that Anko knew that detail off the top of her head. As if she was paying close attention to Naruto's life too. Perhaps you just love saving pretty girls, Gaki. Anko purred at the suddenly bashful Naruto. Hinata almost growled at the way this purple-haired woman was being familiar with her Naruto, and decided to get his attention with hope of leaving. Hee. Don't be like that, Anko-chan. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Naruto replied with an embarrassed blush before he felt a slight tug on the back of his jacket. He took a quick glance behind to see Hinata looking somewhat demure, but it was clear from her expressive pale eyes that she wanted something. Being a little dense, he mistakenly figured she was getting impatient and wanted to go home to eat all of the cinnamon buns in her arms, so he decided to wrap it up. Anyway, I suppose I should leave you ladies alone since I need to walk Hinata-chan home. I'll see you around, Kurenai-san. Anko-chan, see you later. He and Kurenai inclined their heads to each other before casually waving goodbye to Anko as he and Hinata left the shop. Kurenai was impressed with the boy. She knew Uzumaki Naruto warranted special attention when her best friend talked about him so much. I like him. He's nice, polite, and apparently strong too. She pointed out to Anko, who grinned. He's also fun to be around. It never gets boring with him. She replied with a somewhat wistful look in her eyes. Kurenai smirked as she decided to test her friend's reaction. He's also lucky to have the attention of the Hyuga's heiress. It's clear she's got it bad for Naruto-san. She had to fight to keep her smirk from growing when she watched Anko's eyes flash with a hint of envy. Yeah, he is. She replied with a slightly subdued smile. Oh, Anko-chan, you might be having it bad for him too. It's only going to get harder to resist when he becomes a shinobi and you stop seeing him as a child. Kurenai thought. She hoped her friend would be okay if there was any heartbreak in the future. It wasn't like the 2 young women would share one man, right? Anko watched the retreating backs of Naruto and Hinata through the shop's window, and her eyes narrowed slightly on the Hyuga heiress as she giggled at something her friend said. She knew Hinata pulled Naruto out of the shop on purpose to get him away from her. That Hyuga girl could be annoying. At the same moment, Hinata glanced back through the Dango shop's window to see Anko chatting with her raven-haired friend. I should be wary around that Mitarashi Anko. First day of the final year at the academy, finally, today's the beginning of the end. Naruto declared as he stood up in his chair and put a foot up on the desk as if to give out a dramatic speech. His friends and some of the classmates looked up at him. It has been a long and atrocious journey fraught with hazards, fangirls, M&S, boring teachers, fangirls, and more fangirls. Most of the classroom chuckled at his humor while some of the girls fumed at being made fun of. One certain raven-haired boy glared at no one in particular over his steepled hands. He knew who that blonde meant with M&S. As the class were laughing, they nearly jumped out of their skin when a loud voice filled the room. All right, quiet. It's time for class. The shocked students shifted their attention to the front of the room to see a supersized male head affixed onto a normal-sized body as he shouted. They blinked a few times before seeing that the head had returned to normal size, and they put it out of their minds, thinking it was an illusion. They saw this man was wearing a regular Chunin outfit. He had brown hair tied back into pineapple style and he had a long and distinctive scar running across his nose. He was accompanied by a light blue-haired Chunin, who stood quietly at attention next to the scarred man. My name's Yumino Iruka. I will be your instructor for your final year here in the academy. This is my assistant Mizuki. He will be helping me with the practical lessons. I look forward to working with each of you, and I wish all of you the best of luck in obtaining your Hitai 8 by this time next year. As this was going on, Naruto decided to check his new teachers out. He sighed and shrugged slightly when he saw the obvious glare of loathing he usually got from others in Mizuki. Moving on to Iruka, he locked eyes with the new Chunin sensei. At first Naruto thought he saw the same look of hate, but the scarred man seemed to have fought it down and put up a professional look. He smiled. Perhaps I'll have a little fun this year. I'll have to watch out for this sensei though. A prankster knows another, even in X1, and this guy is giving me that wary look. I may actually have some challenge when I do my pranks over the next year. Iruka narrowed his eyes on the infamous blonde prankster, showing an innocent smile. He knows I'm going to keep an eye on him. Let's see if he can get any prank done while Yumino Iruka is around. As the teacher and the problem student glared at each other challengingly, the entire classroom shivered as if they had a feeling they would be caught in the crossfire of something horrible soon. Unko Senin equals shit sage, if you're wondering what Naruto called Jiraiya at the beginning. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I enjoyed the wacky summer adventures between Naruto and Anko and the cinnamon bun incident, and I hope you liked them too. Please be sure to review when you can. More is always better. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like for more what ifs and support the author. See you guys in the next video.